Well, welcome to Money Matters, to your Money Matters special series as we continue to study the habits of happy retirees versus unhappy retirees. As you know, in our work and our interviews, we also, in the upcoming book that I'm currently writing, marriage comes up. And it came up to some extent, and you can retire sooner than you think. But in the next series of that book, in studying happy retirees versus unhappy, marriage comes up. And I wanted to understand the relationship between how long people were married, if that had any sort of impact on happiness, if getting divorced hurt happiness levels or maybe helped happiness levels. And I'm certainly not an expert on marriage at all. I've been married for 16 plus or minus years, and I've got a bunch of little kids, so I'm in the thick of it. But I went out and found who to me looks as though to be the most interesting person that I could find in America around this very topic. And he happens to be in the Atlanta metro area. So it's actually, we're somewhat neighbors here. So I'd like to introduce Dr. David Woodsfellow. Doctor, welcome.
Howdy do. Nice to meet you, Wes.
So Dr. Woodsfellow, he's a clinical psychologist for couples at the Woodsfellow Institute, aptly named, in Atlanta. And he runs it with his wife, Deborah. And Deborah is actually a relationship coach, which I want to ask you about in just a minute. So really what you do in your work in your passion seems to be around couples and basically helping couples and marriages. Is that?
Yeah.
And there's no shortage. And there's no shortage of challenges.
For over 25 years, I have only done couples therapy. It's the only kind of therapy I do. I don't do any individual therapy. I just work with couples. Couples in the morning, couples in the afternoon.
Got it.
In the old days, it was also couples in the evening, but only couples therapy, which means I've done an awful lot of time, over 25,000 hours of couples therapy.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. And remember, to master is only 10,000, right? So you're double the master level. But also,
I'm still working on it because it's infinitely varied.
Yeah.
Every couple's different.
And your background: Harvard, UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, Georgia State. By the way, UC Santa Barbara. I went there on my 10th anniversary. Went to Santa Barbara. It's been a number of years, and I remember going for a run along the Pacific Ocean, which in itself is gorgeous, and then going to that town of Santa Barbara, and then seeing a campus and thinking, this place is too nice to have a college. It was so nice. I was like, this can't be true.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. UCSB is in Isla Vista, its own little neighborhood, and it's spectacularly beautiful. But the thing I love about it is that everyone rides their bikes there. And the thing I really love about it is no one touches their handlebars. I mean, no one.
Everyone's just riding hands-free.
Right. This is the world of balance. Surfing, bicycling, skateboarding. And it was regarded as just unbelievably dorky when I would have my hands on my handlebars.
Oh, you got to be kidding. That is funny.
And that's where I learned how to ride without touching the handlebars.
So you got there as your first year and you're riding around, God forbid, with your handlebars. And you're like, wait a minute. Everybody's just balanced and surfers. And
exactly. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a lesson in it. You want me to talk about that, or you want to move on?
What's the lesson? That's cool. What's the lesson?
Okay. So I realize I want to be in this neighborhood and be like everyone else. So I start trying to ride without the handlebars. Mm-hmm. But the big problem was, as soon as I'd try, pretty soon the bike would start falling over to one side or the other. Mm-hmm. I mean, not hit the ground, but lean enough so I'd have to grab the handlebars. I thought, what's wrong with me? I can't stop the bike from wobbling. About a week into it, I realized the bike is supposed to wobble. It wobbles, you compensate. It wobbles, you compensate the other way. It wobbles, you compensate again. It wobbles, and that goes on the whole ride. I had thought of wobbling as a problem. Wobbling's not a problem. It's the nature of balance. And I had that insight, and then I didn't need to touch my handlebars anymore.
And now what were you, because you've been to a lot of these schools. I mean, I guess, was Harvard your undergrad? Where did you study psychology?
Yeah. Harvard undergrad. In Harvard, I studied what's called social relations, social psychology, clinical psychology, social anthropology, and sociology. A wonderful department.
Yeah. And then from there, so then you went to UC Santa Barbara for
master's degree.
For master's.
I got a master's degree in counseling, and then Georgia State to get my PhD in clinical.
Okay. And so we're here, and you're also the author, by the way, and I'm going to actually start with this. Now, I didn't, just for our listeners, I didn't bring on David because of the book. You know, a lot of times people do interviews, it's all about the book. And really, I think the book itself has popped up since I had David come on the show. But the title of the book is Love Cycles, Fear Cycles. Is that correct? Which, by the way, it sounds a little bit like it could be a stock market book. We have fear cycles in the market constantly, and we have love cycles constantly. And that's what makes it so difficult. And I suspect yours is more about maybe the good and bad parts of marriage.
Well, it's really about the cycles two people get into. So almost all relationships start in a love cycle. I feel good, I act good. My wife feels good, she acts good. I feel better, I act great. She feels better, she acts great. We call it in love, head over heels, stars in our eyes. We're both feeling wonderful and making the other feel great. It's a good thing. Everybody wants it. But given enough time, like a year or two, and people also discover their fear cycle, and it's the worst combination between the two of them. For some reason or another, I'm not feeling so good, so I act in a way that's not so good. So my wife doesn't feel good, and she acts in a way that's not so good either. The most well-known fear cycle is called fight and flight. Of all the cycles we know, one person tends to fight, and one person tends to run away. About 85% of couples fall into that pattern.
At some point.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. No, at their worst points.
Yeah. Meaning that 85% of folks at some point are going to get, and when you say this fight or flight, are you referring to, let's say, one of the two in the couple? One is the fighter, and one's the I'm going to run away from the fight.
Yes, it's exactly what I'm saying, and that's the 85%. I don't mean 85% will have a fear cycle. I think 100% of couples will have a fear cycle.
Yeah, a fight.
85% will have one in this format: fight versus flight.
Got it. What's the other 15? Yeah. What's the other 15%? 2
fights or 2 flights.
Okay. 2 fighters, they just keep going at it, or 2 runners.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, exactly. But many of the people listening to this podcast, it's happened around money.
Yes.
Because money is another issue that is important, has to do with survival, or said another way, can be deeply threatening. And it's the threat and the fear that gets a fear cycle going. So the classic financial fear cycle is called spend versus save.
Right.
And when 2 people are stuck in that, and that escalates around and around and around, that is not the good outcome.
So the spend versus save, now that's kind of like the fight and the flight, right? It's kind of.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I remember trying to find, I was a consultant for a show called Life or Debt. And it was the topic obviously was this, it was exactly what you talked about. It's these money fights in families, and they led to, are they going to fix the money fight? Or are they going to, basically get divorced or go bankrupt or something like that?
Right.
And I remember looking up, and usually it feels like you can find any statistic today somewhere quickly, and I never could find the classic, how many people get divorced statistic. Is that
It's around 50%. It's around 50%.
It really is. Okay. Yeah. And I guess that's over your lifetime. So you may be married today the second time, but you count as being divorced at least once. So 50% of people are divorced at least one time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's approximately, but that's around where it is.
Okay. And if you were to take an inventory of the topics people fight on, A, are the topics what matter? And B, what are those topics? So we talked about kids is one. And money is another. Is that, how big is that topic that you see in couples?
Yeah. So there's a lot of topics it could be.
Mm-hmm.
Family is another one. In-laws is another one.
In-laws, yeah.
Work is another one. Time together is another one. Addiction and affairs are other ones. Anger itself and how anger is handled. Roles, division of labor, who does what around the house. There are really quite a few different topics. They're basically all the difficulties of life can be topics that people fight about.
And when do
Sex.
people end up coming to you? Oh, sex stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Sex, intimacy, different people's needs, how well that's working or flowing or not.
Gosh, so it's really like it's a really big list. It's a long list.
Absolutely. Now, a few of these are well-known deal killers.
What are they?
Affairs, abuse, and addiction. They've got to change and change fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because they will end marriages.
They really will. Those are the deal killers.
They're the most severe of this group.
Okay, let me just add, how often, well, I guess they're 100% of your people that come actually that have these issues have gone to see somebody. But I guess, to some extent, if you talk about things that are that heavy, affairs and abuse and addiction, which, listen, people are not perfect and these things happen a lot.
Right.
People care enough, though, to come to someone like you, Doctor, hey, let's go see, we need to see somebody. We need to see Dr. Woodsfellow. I guess to some extent, at least they really do want to, most of the time they do want to salvage it.
Let me answer a different question. It's related.
Sure.
It's, when do you need help?
Yeah.
And the answer is when you're not making progress. It's not the severity of the problem. It's whether you're making progress with it.
Okay.
Now, you might want to give it a few months. Try.
Mm-hmm.
But don't give it a few years.
And then it's too late.
Well, you don't want to take that chance.
Yeah.
It's like, if you can fix something yourself, do it, for goodness sakes.
Mm-hmm.
But how will you know whether you can or you can't? Whether it's getting better.
Yeah. So that's obviously when you need to see somebody. You go 6 months and the problem's still the same. Hey, wait a minute. We're making no progress here. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay, keep going.
You asked whether, does everyone who comes in want to save their marriage? No, unfortunately not. Most, but there's always one who wants to save their marriage. Yeah, no one comes in if one of them doesn't want to save their marriage. But it's not always true that both want to save their marriage.
And you can tell probably pretty quickly.
Well, I always start with an assessment, and that's part of what I'm trying to assess. Now, there's a joke about how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb. Do you happen to know that?
I've never heard of it with psychologists, but humor me.
Just one, but the bulb's got to want to change.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So
when a couple comes in and one wants to save the marriage, and the other is not so sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're going to focus on right away first.
Because you got to get the foundation right in order to have a chance.
Sometimes, not always, there's things that we can talk about and get into that will address that person's motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But when you got that, one wants in and one wants out, that's what you're dealing with first, and you've either got to shift that or they're going to split up. Sometimes you can shift it.
How often, I think now that we're talking, I think some of my favorite shows have been about couples therapy. I remember the HBO show with, you probably have seen it, but I just remember it being like the best show. I mean, my wife and I, because my wife actually she's a nurse, and then she went and got her CNS, the clinical nurse specialist in psychiatry. And she did that. Yeah. Got her master's at Georgia State. And then we started having kids, and she did all her hours. And then she almost went into practice, and then we started having a bunch of kids. So she is, now that I think about it, I can't remember the HBO show, but there was some wonderful television around this. It's just like, it's such an interesting topic. So you've got all the, So you've got, I'm thinking about our listeners. They're thinking about, gosh, I've got in-law problems. I've got, hey, we don't spend enough time together. Somebody's got addiction. Yeah. Somebody's got anger issues. I'm doing all the work. You're doing none of the work.
Right.
Maybe it's an issue in the bedroom. It's sex or intimacy. And it's for you, it is all of the above, right?
Absolutely.
All these things.
Oh, yeah.
What about this? And this is for our let's say, retired clients. And this was actually, one of my last questions I was going to ask. I'll ask you now.
Okay.
Because it's not the end of I want to keep talking about this. When you've been married for a lot of years, is there a stage of, do we grow apart and then do we grow back together? How often do you just see marriages just, hey, we've been together forever. We don't have any more of that really, the love cycles you talk about.
Yeah. So yes, that absolutely can happen. And that's sometimes called growing apart. And it's sometimes called a cold divorce. A hot divorce is when they're fighting. And a cold divorce is when there's just not much feeling left. Now, it turns out, although the overall divorce rate is 50%, if we graphed how many couples get divorced by how many years they were married, it's not the same. There are 2 times it peaks at about 7 years of marriage and at about 21 years of marriage. And what these correspond to approximately is the crisis of having children and the crisis of empty nest. On average, not always, there are exceptions, but on average, the early divorces at about 7 years, early in marriage, are hot divorces. And the divorces at the second peak, approximately 21 years of marriage, are cold divorces, the growing apart divorces.
Interesting. And I remember now, I actually, one of my many economic classes back at the University of North Carolina, I remember one of them was actually I think it was the economics of marriage. And now that you mentioned that, I remember that chart from a long, long, long time ago. So those are the 2 peaks, 7 and 21.
Yeah.
The nest starts to fill up, and then the nest is empty.
Right.
And on average. So let's go to, because our listeners are, let's say, more headed towards retirement or in retirement. Let's say you're 55 or 60. Now everyone's out of the house. You get the cold. What are the issues you say? What are the main issues there?
Well, the issues at retirement, while there are divorces then, I think the crossroads is a little different. The more frequent crossroads is, are we going to have a happy marriage or an unhappy marriage?
Because I guess 21 years, I guess, is really not retirement age even yet.
Not quite. No, that's a click or 2 further down.
Right, right. So 21, you're still probably, if you get married at 25, now you're really at 50, mid 50s, and you're not quite at retirement. You're probably about 10 years out still.
That's right.
5
Yeah,
to 10 years.
that's right. Yeah.
So if you, let's say you make it through 21 years, right? Now we're in our 60s and we have been empty nesters. Where do you see those roads part?
Well, the big parting is, are we going to find a way to be happy together, or will we just coexist, not very happy together, and find our happiness in other parts of our lives? How important and meaningful will our marriage be versus, I don't know, two people who have shared a life and share living space, but are just not very connected? I think that's the crossroads there.
So let me dig into that for just a second.
Sure.
Let's assume people stay married. Two different couples. One couple, you're saying 30-year plus marriage, they still have. What would you call that? Just like a really strong connection still?
I'd say they love each other.
They love it's just love cycle. They still have the love cycles.
Well, they feel a lot of love for each other.
Okay. Versus you see where somebody who's, let's say 65, they've been married forever, and they're just more like partners. They're not in love.
Yeah, they tolerate each other.
Love versus tolerate. And obviously, so that's a huge crossroad. Do you have couples? So you have people come into you that is the case?
Sure. Absolutely.
How often? So that seems like a very tall order to me. If I'm you, Dr. Woodsfellow, I'm 65. My wife and I honestly are just don't. Is it a grow apart? Is it a cold? Is it a two more? Well, you would think after 30 years, you've got to have some stuff in common or something that held you together that long.
Sure, of course.
How hard is it for you to help? Do they mostly not stay married if they're coming to you at that point, or do some of them get? Is there a decent save rate?
Yeah, there is a decent save rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
What helps? How do you get these two people that are thinking, I'm just going to tolerate you until we die, to, hey, we're back in love? That seems like a pretty awesome story to be able to figure out.
For starters, we need to end some nastiness. So there's two kinds of nastiness around. And one's commission and one's omission. So the commission is generally called contempt.
Okay.
People who put each other down, call each other names, say bad things about each other. Or in the worst case, people who have some physical violence in their relationship.
Yeah.
That's got to end. I mean, if you want to try to be happy, that's got to leave the table.
Yep.
You can't be telling each other you're bad and expect to be happy.
And that is something that people can work, they can get better at.
Better at? People can decide to stop it, and then it stops.
Yeah. So commission.
There's people who use foul language with their spouse. That's stupid.
Yeah.
It's a bad habit. No,
and it's one of these. But again, it's one of the so that commission is like one of those things that makes you not like each other.
Right. Yeah. So conceivably, that person might be somewhat irritated with their spouse. We can live with that. We just can't live with them calling their spouse names.
Yep. Okay. So that can be fixed.
Oh yeah, people fix that if they decide to.
Yep.
Now,
what about omission?
Omission is the cold, withdrawn, silent treatment, ain't talking to you, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to persuade people that they're free to do that, but if they continue doing that, they will not be happy in this relationship.
Yep.
So you might want to try changing that. Now, You literally have some people who just plain don't talk to each other, or their talking to each other is all logistics.
Only like, let's make plans and what's the utility
Who's going to do what?
Yeah. And you've got to get into, and that would be called, that's just, I guess that's a form, I guess, of omission, because you're not talking anything of substance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the problem with that one is it erodes a friendship. But that's not that hard a one to change, assuming someone wants to try a few new things. And I just get those people chatting with each other.
Okay.
I say, look, I'll suggest something that, look, some of your listeners, this might be worth for them to try. In case you're not doing this already, consider having a daily chat that every day you sit down somewhere together in your house or on your porch or deck or something and have a little chat for 10, 20 minutes. Now, here's what I mean by chat. Not problems. You can't talk about things you know are problems. You can't talk about each other, and you can't talk about your relationship. Those are problems. You might want to talk about them, yes. Just don't do it during your chat, please.
Got it.
You want the chat to be pleasant. And also, not just logistics. So what's in the middle?
Yeah.
Well, stuff that's interesting. You could talk about your dog and what they did, or dogs. You could talk about your kids and what they did. If it's not going to lead to a fight, you could talk about what you heard on the radio or TV or in the newspaper. You could talk about the neighbors. You could talk about a hobby. Anything that's pleasant. Maybe something they'd find humorous. And in fact, each person should think of a little something to talk about.
Yeah.
But not problems, not logistics. Because if you talk about problems, pretty soon you'll be fighting and pretty soon you'll stop chatting. So there's a straightforward thing that people could do to improve their connection and their friendship.
You keep, I like, what's interesting, I like that you are using this word friendship because, you know, I guess to some extent you get maybe two sides. When you say that word, I think of two things. One, you do want to be married to your best friend.
Yes.
But then again, you don't, at some point in the future, when you're talking about in retirement or rehab, you don't want to be just friends, or is that okay when you get to be older?
I'll give you a larger answer to that question. There are 5 necessary parts to a good marriage.
Ooh, I want to hear these 5.
Friendship is 1. Intimacy is the one you also mentioned. That's 2. You also need security. You also need teamwork. And you need some sense of purpose or meaning. And you need all 5 to be pretty good.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, you can't just be friends with no intimacy at all. That just doesn't count. Doesn't count. Right? Or not that it doesn't count, but it doesn't necessarily work forever.
It doesn't add up to enough. You actually need all 5 of these. I'm not saying any one of them is bad.
Yeah.
It's not true. But a happy marriage needs all 5. Security on the foundation, friendship, intimacy, teamwork, and a sense of purpose or meaning. By the way, they don't...
A couple of these real quick, because I mean, friendship, that makes sense. Intimacy, that makes sense to me. Basically, that's at least some sort of in the bedroom, right?
Yes, although affection throughout the rest of the day is also part of intimacy. And sharing deeply is intimacy. So yes, it includes sexual intimacy, but it's also emotional intimacy and, you know things about me that no one else knows, that kind of stuff.
Security, though, what is that? What's that piece of it?
Well, finances is a big aspect of security. To feel secure that we're going to keep our home, that we're going to be able to eat and live in a way that works for us, that we have some sense of our future together.
Yeah. Okay. So it really is. That is a cornerstone. Money.
It's the foundation, actually. Of these five, security is the foundation level.
Yeah, it is. So because you have to feel good about your home. You have to feel. It's funny that that I would not have thought that you would have that as your bedrock, but heck, I agree with that 100%. I love that.
Well, it's the truth, because without security, the rest, it's like falls apart.
Mm-hmm. I think back, even if you go back 200 years, 500 years, marriage, it would probably even be more so. It'd be maybe a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Part of what people are doing together is creating security. That's not silly. That's not tangential. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line.
Wow. So finances, money, more, again, in my research, by the way, one of the biggest things I found, and I don't think, again, it's not that surprising, is that money and happiness have this relationship that more money does equal more happiness, but only up to a point, and then it just plateaus off. And I think the point, if you were to answer that, what is the inflection point? It's security.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you have insecurity, that insecurity threatens everything else.
Yeah. And then the teamwork part and the purpose or meaning part. The teamwork. Okay.
Here's what I mean by teamwork. Conflict is inevitable. There are differences between all people. There are disagreements in all relationships. Mm-hmm. Conflict's not the problem. The problem is how you handle the conflict. The good name for how to handle a conflict is teamwork. Mm. How do we as a team work with our differences and our disagreements? Okay, you like to spend more, I like to save more. That's a genuine, bona fide difference rooted in our past. Okay, it's here to stay. Can we work with this in a way that feels okay to both of us or not? Mm-hmm. The difference is never going away.
Okay, so teamwork is really about how we deal with the conflict.
Yes.
And then I guess any issues to come up. How are we both helping when something happens with the kids? Are we both involved?
Absolutely. Yes. Teamwork is how we deal with all the challenges we might look at.
And then the fifth one, so we have friendship, intimacy, security, teamwork, purpose or meaning. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, it turns out that in happy marriages, people share some important stuff, something that strikes both of them as important. Now, it could be raising children.
Yeah.
Trying to bring some happy children into the world. Sure. There are lots of things. It could be some purpose or mission in this world. Writing a book, teaching others, helping others, being kind. It could be something religious. It could be something ethical. Mm-hmm. It could be a project. It could be a plan.
Mm-hmm. Could be the grandkids. and
yeah,
the family.
Absolutely it could. Of course. A legacy is often something that seems meaningful. But that book, The Purpose-Driven Life, was right on this topic. Mm-hmm. That having a purpose unites people and enriches those people. And like with many of these other things, it doesn't matter what the purpose is. It matters that the two people can unite with it.
Yeah. I see that in my retirement happiness research is that sense of purpose is one of the absolute keys to being a happy retiree. No question about it.
Absolutely.
Hang on one second here. Let me hang on. Sure. Zoom. There we go. You're probably like, what is that noise? That is a fly.
I didn't hear it actually. So.
Oh, you didn't hear it. That was a fly that is no longer with us here in the studio, in the Moss Studios.
Good.
Okay. So that is fascinating. Those 5 pillars. By the way, is that in your book, Love Cycles, Fear Cycles?
I'm not sure.
Or is that just 101?
That idea is entitled The Sound Relationship House. And it was from John Gottman, professor at the University of Washington. And it was his synthesis of his 30 years of marriage research. I just gave it my own names, but it's his idea.
And so, the way you name these 5 pillars: friendship, intimacy, security, teamwork, and purpose. And and I think that, and I guess, is it safe to say, and this is what, as I'm zeroing in on this, if you're a couple, I think what you're saying is, and if you're listening, if one of those 5 is not where it needs to be and it hasn't improved, that's when you don't ignore one of those 5. Maybe go get some help with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. First step is, as you think of that list of 5, you would think about, what are we really good at, and are there some that need work?
Mm-hmm.
So if some need improvement, try to make those improvements. But if you can't, get some help. Why not?
How often? This is just me thinking of things in numbers. Scale of 1 to 10. My kids, everything scale of 1 to 10. The scale 1 to 10. How often, when you see a couple come in and on a happiness scale, or how great they are together, how good the marriage is as low as a 2, can it get to an 8? Or if it's a 5, can it get to a 7? Is it dramatic? Is it incremental improvement? Do you see?
Oh, no, it can be really dramatic. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
No, people come in really at odds with each other, feeling terrible, thinking, gee, I think we just have to split up. And they can be extremely happy at the end. Oh, yeah. No.
So you can go from a 2 to arguably to a 10.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I like that. That's hopeful.
It's kind of amazing how much change can be made. You see, like that chat thing. Now, that's not that hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it takes 20 minutes a day, but it's just not rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
Or like that other one I said. If you decide to stop using foul language, for goodness sakes, you can do it.
Yep.
There are some little changes people can make that have an enormous difference.
Wow. Love these ideas. Let's go to the times we are in. Maybe we'll circle back to that. Is that we're in a pandemic. We're maybe together more than ever. We've almost gotten a vision of what retirement life could be like. Are you seeing couples struggle with that very thing?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the issues in both the pandemic and retirement is a topic called roles and responsibilities, or who does what. So there's a culture change that we're all going through, and it's from traditional role splits towards more egalitarian role splits. Go back a couple of generations, and almost all couples had traditional role splits.
The couple of the 1950s. Yeah, the 1950s couple.
Exactly. Right. And far fewer couples have traditional role splits now. I'm not saying none, but we're getting more couples with egalitarian role splits. So our United States culture is in transition about that, which makes some people uncomfortable because there's new ideas around different from the way their grandparents lived.
Yeah.
But when we get to each couple, the question is whether or not someone is willing to even talk about the idea of doing some things differently.
Mm-hmm. Is there a silver bullet to this one? Is it, hey, look, this is the new world we live in, and this is just the way it is? Is it, let's accept that? Or is this a tough thing to fix?
There's a silver bullet, but it's different than, it's not a silver bullet about how to split your roles. The silver bullet is called willingness to be influenced.
And I guess that is a critical component for any marital dispute, I guess. Is that right? Or
yes, that's totally right. But even more than that, that is the single biggest predictor of whether people will be happily married long term. Of all the things we could know about a couple, that's the most important one to know as to whether they're going to be long-term happy.
Willingness to be influenced.
Yes, that is, it is okay with me that my wife has some influence on me and asks me to do some new things and change some things. That's all right with me. Mm-hmm. I decide I'm willing to be influenced, as opposed to, hey, I'm too old to change. That's the way I do it. That's the way I've always done it. That's the way I'm going to do it.
So if you find yourself in that camp, then the reality of staying married in one of these joint relationships with friendship, industry, security, teamwork is, I guess, it's kind of low at that point.
Chances are you will not be happily married long term.
Yeah, if you're not willing to be influenced.
Be influenced. That's right. Yeah. And that just comes right out of the data. That was a big research study, and it's the biggest predictor. So, yes, a person's entitled to be as stubborn and whatever as they want, but they're giving up happiness in marriage.
One of the main things that I see happy retirees to do is they have these, what I call core pursuits, which you had mentioned something earlier about, doesn't matter what they are, it matters that you have them. And the core pursuits can be anything. My research shows you need 3.6 of these things. One thing I don't know of, though, is, and I guess this would I just get your opinion, I see this a lot. Oh, it works all the time. He needs to get a bunch of stuff to do. I've seen that more often than not with couples in their 60s. He works all the time. He needs to get more stuff to do. And he will say, I'll do plenty of stuff once I'm retired. This happens, doesn't it? It's a tough thing to do. And I actually write about that. But my question is, how important is it to have similar core pursuits? Or is it better to have your own core pursuits and maybe share one or two? And what would be your opinion on that?
I think you got to share at least one or two.
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me if sharing three were good. You got to have something to do together that feels really good to the two of you.
Together, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, separate is not awful, but the lack of together would be bad.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what it is if you're truly doing if you got your three things or four things that's all you care about, those are your hobbies on steroids, and your spouse has three or four other ones and nothing overlaps, then those are just separate lives, like, to some extent, right?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. And you can invite your spouse along to your thing, but it's good to have some things together.
At least one common core pursuit.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I mean, again, how many couples do you know that are happy that don't share something, right? The answer is, and you would say none.
Yeah, I think I would say that.
Slim to none. Financial habits. Let's get back to that for a second. Do you see a particular financial habit that has a tough impact?
Yes.
What is that?
Two-pot systems. I think one-pot systems and three-pot systems work, and I think two-pot systems, not good.
Ooh, two-pot systems. Don't worry.
Right.
By the way,
I like one or three.
that question on my last research study, and my research supports you 1,000%.
Aha.
The one pot for retirees where most everything is a joint account is the happy retiree. We handle our finances separately, which I still see a fair amount, usually is not a real good sign of happiness. And what the heck?
The other
three-pot
really big one.
What's the three-pot?
Yours, mine, and ours.
Oh yeah. So you're okay with one or three. You like the one pot or the three pot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The next big watershed one is financial planning or not.
Head in the sand yeah.
Yeah. Financial planning good, no financial planning bad. Goes to security, goes to teamwork, goes to purpose.
And again, that could take any shape or form, right? And a couple sits down once a month and spends an hour going over finances is part of it, or they actually go and have they go to see a financial advisor and do planning. It doesn't matter how you're doing it as long as you're doing some sort of planning.
I think the watershed is yes or no. My recommendation would be both of the things you said.
Yeah.
Both to have periodic kind of business meetings and also to get some professional help with the financial planning.
The other thing I actually, I was going to say, I did see there is interesting in some of my research I've seen where no planning is bad this is in relation to happiness. No planning is bad. Some planning is good. A ton of discussion about it. Actually, I saw happiness levels actually fall off a little bit. And that may just be that it's more of a constant conversation because there is a lack of security. Maybe there's money problems in those marriages.
That could be. So that could be. I thought of another possibility.
Yeah.
That could be a control power struggle too.
Or like obsess. I think the way I've come down on this is it's good to talk about money, but don't obsess over money.
Right. Yeah. So money can lead to, as we mentioned earlier, fear cycles. And there are fear cycles that are about control.
What tough conversations should you as a couple have that really do help?
Okay. You got to talk about your wills.
Oh God, really?
Absolutely.
I didn't think you were going to say that. Okay, your legacy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and what you're going to leave to whom? Yeah.
And this is now you're talking about retired couples. You're talking about retired couples.
I'm talking about everybody. Look, I hope we all live to 120 in perfect health. That's what I'd like. But people die unexpectedly.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, let me rephrase this. This is your answer to what conversations do most married couples avoid? You see that, so they avoid, this is one that people do not want to talk about.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I answering the wrong question?
No. That's exactly right. That is one. I mean, there's a reason a third of, I think the $10 million net worth, a third of that group doesn't have a will. Don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Is there anything else that's maybe non-financial that's a really tough, that's something that people should bring up that nobody really wants to talk about?
Sure. A living will. What if I'm incapacitated? What if I'm brain dead? What if I'm paralyzed?
And do you think that conversation, by having it, is to some extent kind of an intimate conversation?
Hell yes. Sure. Another thing to talk about is a long-term one. Who will care for us when we get really old? So these are not emergencies. They're long-term. They're often avoided. They're very important.
Yeah, and they are intimate conversations. So to have them are a good thing. It's one of the pillars,
Absolutely.
intimacy.
Yeah.
One of the things that you had mentioned that Deborah, your wife, by the way, how long you guys been married?
We have been married 20 years.
You said that she is a relationship coach.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that different than what you are?
Yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist. When she works with couples, she only focuses on their relationship. If there are other problems, she refers that out. If someone's depressed or anxious, she would refer that out.
Mm-hmm.
She's more likely to work on things in the present day, less likely to go all the way back to childhood issues.
Okay.
So her skills are a lot of what we've been talking about, which is what people can do now, today, to have better relationships. But relationship coaches limit themselves to talking about the couple's relationship.
Relative to husband or spouse has some longer standing issues.
Right.
Okay, so it's about them together, not, hey, here's something you need to work on. Whereas a psychologist like you would go in.
Could do both.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. She would tend to refer out for that one.
One thing that I keep saying our last question, but I promise this will be the last one. We had talked about this before we ended up doing the recording this interview, was the thought that divorce, in one of my more recent studies, what I found is that happiness levels were okay, were good if you didn't get divorced, and they were actually fine if you had been divorced. Leading me to say marriage is great. One divorce, one do-over is okay too. But then it's a second divorce and a third unhappiness or happiness levels really fell at that point. What would just be your take on that?
That's a great question. So both my wife and I were in our second marriage. Each of us were married before. So we happen to be an example of a second marriage that is successful. However, while the divorce rate for first marriages is around 50%, the divorce rate for second marriages is around 60%. So it's a little harder to hang on to a second marriage.
Why is that? Now, to some extent, I would think, my goodness, you're married for 20 years, didn't work out because you maybe got married too young and you figured out really who you were. Second marriage, you really should know who you are and who this person is and meet. Well, I would have guessed that it's a lower rate of divorce. It's not.
Yeah. And I don't know the answer to that question. I do know a joke on this topic, though. And they say that second marriage is the triumph of hope over experience.
We're going to do it again. I'm so hopeful. And then what about third?
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I have worked with couples in their third and fourth marriage. I just don't know how, I don't have the kind of data you have to think about how that plays out.
What's your gut, though? If you see somebody in a third marriage or even fourth, it's starting to get, wow, it seems like a lot. Is that are those people that are just in general hard to live with, unwilling to change, like you had said earlier?
My gut reaction is to wonder about that person, whether they understand their part in it.
Yeah.
That's my gut reaction is, see, I think that's one of the keys in a fear cycle. You got to understand your part in it. Because if you can only see your partner's part in it, you'll never get out of it. So it's just couldn't be more important to be able to see one's own part. And yeah, when someone's been in a pattern a lot of times, I do wonder, do they realize what they're doing wrong?
Yeah. Well, and I guess that one of the things I've taken away from this is that I mean, again, obviously everybody fights. Everybody has these fear cycles. It's really our job in marriage to get out of the fear cycle and be able to really
absolutely
get out of the fear cycle. Because nobody's got a problem on the love cycle. That's awesome, right?
Our job is to get into the love cycle, to get back into the love cycle.
Always get back in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the goal is to spend as little time in your fear cycle as possible and as much time in your love cycle as possible. So the movement is when you get sucked into your fear cycle again, you got to extricate yourself. And our book talks about all the different ways to get yourself out.
So I'm going to be saying to Lynn, next time we find, we say, Lynn, let's try to get, come on, honey, let's try to get back into the love cycle. I like that.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Wow. This is so interesting to talk through. Thank you so much. I mean, I know I kept you way long, which is just an indication.
No worries.
Fascinated I am by this topic and how good you are as a guest. So,
well, thank you.
Dr. David Woodsfellow, clinical psychologist, couples therapist at the Woodsfellow Institute, couples therapy, Woodsfellow Institute of Couples Therapy in Atlanta, right here in Georgia, with his wife, Deborah, who's also a relationship coach, a little bit different from what David does. Harvard, UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, Georgia State, and maybe more importantly, Atlanta.